Welcome to a practical guide to ArcGIS Online security today. My name is Andrea Rosso. I'm lead architect on ArcGIS Online.
My name is Jeff Smith. I'm a product engineer on the ArcGIS Enterprise team.
And so today we'll be focusing on security as it pertains to ArcGIS Online. So ArcGIS Online is Esri's software as a service product in the cloud, where you as a customer can subscribe and get a virtual portal to use and manage your data, disseminate it, analyze it, and so on. And it is built on a multi-tenant cloud system where there's a lot of other organizations working at the same time. So there's always a lot of questions on security and how you control how your information is accessed and who has access to it. So today we'll talk a little bit about the fundamentals of the things that you can control, the portal information model. We'll talk a bit about feature layer security, especially when you start getting into editing scenarios. We'll talk about authentication and how you might integrate ArcGIS Online with your identity provider. We'll also talk a little bit on the developer side about how you integrate applications with ArcGIS Online identity so you can actually enhance your applications to use ArcGIS Online information. And then we'll talk a little bit about other portal security settings that are available to you that have to do with security. So the first thing to understand is the portal information model. There are four basic pieces in play. There's the portal itself. That's the place that you work in, where you manage all your information. There are users. Those are users that work in the portal. There are items. That's the generic name that we give your information, your data sets, your services. And then there are groups. Groups are a way for you to share items with a group of users within the portal. And as we talk through some of these concepts, there's always a backing REST API to everything that you see on ArcGIS Online. That we have documented on our developer site. So I put the REST endpoint there, but really you have to go to the docs to understand how to use it. So I'll be referring to that a few times in the next few slides. We've wrapped the REST API in various ways in our SDKs, in our runtime SDKs, in our JavaScript API, in our Python API, and so on. So those give you a much sort of nicer way of interacting with the API in our backend rather than using the JSON from our REST APIs directly. So the first thing, the first item of those four is the portal. So the portal, as I said, is where you work. It represents your organization. We also call it sometimes a subscription. That's what you actually subscribe to when you sign up for ArcGIS Online. And when you subscribe the first time, you're asked for a part of a custom URL, so you get to choose something.maps.arcgis.com. And when you go there, that's where you log in and you actually do work. And that's where your users would log in and manage their information too. A portal can be public or private. So if you set it to public, everyone anonymously can go to that URL and see your front page. You can customize that front page. Maybe you might want to put a gallery on the front page to expose some interesting maps and data sets that you want to disseminate. Or you can set it to private, meaning that everybody who goes to that endpoint will have to log in before actually seeing any information. And on the right side there, you just see an example of calling the REST API as far as the portal. So each portal has an ID. So if you're logged in as a particular user in a portal, you can get information about it and all its settings as a JSON response. Of course, in the JS API, for instance, it's much nicer. You have an object that actually encapsulates everything. So we usually recommend you use one of our SDKs or APIs. Then there's items. Items are what we generically call your information, your data sets. They have different types. So there are 40 or more different types of items now available to you. These are things like maps and layers and services and data sets. There's shapefile CSVs, PDFs. There's all kinds of different types of items that you can choose from and upload and manage. This type is represented in the REST API too of the item. All items that you upload or create are private by default. So nobody else except you, the owner, can see that item until you share it beyond that. So you can share the item to groups of users who can then actually see your information. You can share it to your organization, so to the entire portal or all the users within that portal, or to everyone. And when we say everyone, we mean anonymous users. So anybody who goes to arcgis.com, searches for information, would be able to find your particular item. We also send information to Google and Bing and so on for search engines to be able to discover those items. So it's truly public once you set that item to be public. So you have to really think about that in terms of set up a profile, so you can set up a thumbnail and a description for yourself. And so you might set yourself to be publicly searchable so that other people can understand who you are. Maybe you're exposing some public data set and you want to give them information about who you are and why you're doing this. And then users have roles. So roles determine what a user can do. We have some built-in roles into ArcGIS Online that come out of the box. One is the administrator, who's your super user. They can actually do anything and everything in your organization. There's a publisher, who is a user who can publish feature layers and tile layers and basically services. There is a regular user who can still create data. They can create maps and they can upload data sets like CSVs and shapefiles, but they can't actually publish services. And then there's a viewer who has read-only access to information, so they cannot actually create anything. These built-in roles are made up of privileges, and you actually have the ability to take these fine-grained privileges and combine them into custom roles that then you can assign to users, so that you can control even more what a particular user does. You can have users that are very specific, have a very specific function in your portal with very specific privileges. We also have some templates of roles that you can choose from that already set up a lot of privileges for you, just as a helper to get you started. But you can then go in and check on and off various privileges. And when you look at it from a developer point of view, when you go to a user's endpoint, you get the whole list of privileges that they have access to. And based on that, for instance, your application could customize itself to only show read functions versus read-write functions and things like that. And finally, there's groups. Groups are a way for you to share items with a group of users. They contain users and items. Any user within that group can access those items within it. And groups have a visibility too. They can be shared to no one, i.e. private. They can be shared at the organization level, or they can be shared to everyone. That does not translate to what's inside the group. So the items within it don't inherit this. It is still in the control of the owner of the item to make the item public for others to see. This really only pertains to the group itself. So there could be a public group out there that contains items within it that are not public, and therefore anonymous users can see the group, but they can't actually see the items within them. And it makes for some interesting use cases. There are some workflows. It helps with some workflows to set up various collections of things. The other way that you can use a group is as a way to gather items, maybe under a particular theme or thematic items into a particular group. So the group owner has the ability to share whatever items that they have access to into the group to create these collections. So you might want to create a gallery of items, and so you might put all the items that you care about into one group and then use the group to discover those items. This is how we built the Living Atlas. So the Living Atlas is a collection that we curate, and we put certain items that are in the Living Atlas inside of a group so other people can discover them. And then there's a specialized set of group, or a specialized type of group that we call groups with update capabilities. So regular groups only allow users within that group to access the data. Groups with update capabilities allow you to actually update the items that are within that group. So any user within one of these groups can update any of the items within that group. Because of that power, we restricted some, so only admins can create this type of group. Items and users must be within the same organization as the group. So with regular groups, actually, you can collaborate between organizations. So you can actually add items and users from different organizations if you want to collaborate on certain projects. But with these types of groups, it can only be within the organization. And that capability cannot be toggled once you create the group. So we wanted to prevent a situation where users are adding information to a group that is basically read-only, but then the group admin being able to flip that on would mean that they can then go and actually change all those particular items. So this works very well for scenarios like shift operations where you have multiple users coming in and updating, say, a common web map with, say, fire boundaries and so on. Or it also helps with collaborative editing. So in the case of feature layers, one very powerful feature of the online platform is that you can create these feature layers and you can enable editing and let people edit features, insert features, curate information. And so one thing to understand is there's an editing switch on these feature layers, but you don't need to switch those on for certain types of users. So there are certain users that can always edit. So the owner of that feature layer can always edit. The admins of the organization in which that feature layer exists can always edit that feature layer. And the members of these groups that I just mentioned, these groups with update capabilities, can always edit a feature layer within that group. So you don't have to switch on editing for those types of people to do editing. You only enable editing when you actually want anybody else who can access that feature layer to be able to edit. And that means that if that feature layer is exposed to the organization, anybody in the organization can edit. If that feature layer is public, then it means that anonymous users can actually edit your feature layer, which is something most probably won't want to have. So be careful with that one. There are cases where you are collecting data for crowdsourcing type of applications where you might want to have that scenario, but typically you do want to have a user log in before they are able to actually modify data. When you enable editing, you can set a growing list of options. You can have the editor, the user submitting information, be able to do anything, add, update, delete, or you can restrict to things like only change attributes, only be able to add features, or only be able to modify things that are already there. So there's different settings that you can enable or disable for editing there that helps you sort of control that a little bit more. There's a few custom roles that allow you to control things to do with feature layer editing. One is you can switch off editing for particular users in your organization. So for particular users, you might not want to allow them to edit any feature services in the organization because of whatever type of user they are. And then you can also have a privilege that allows you to override the various settings that you have on a feature layer, in terms of if your feature layer is only allowing people to add new features, you can have specific users who are able to overcome that and be able to curate the information that are added to the feature layer. There's something that we've introduced not too long ago that allows you even more flexibility, which we call hosted feature layer views. So this is very much like a database view that you can put on top of a table. In this case, you're creating a view on top of a feature layer. So you can actually create this view, and the view can have different properties than the feature layer itself. So it can have a different sharing level. You can share it with different people. You can have different editing properties, different export restrictions in terms of being able to export the data or not, different filters, different metadata, different time settings. So you can set up for instance, a feature layer view that exposes information to the public read-only, then another one that exposes it to a subset of users to be able to contribute data, and maybe to another view that allows someone to curate the data and actually clean it up before it goes public. All based on one particular feature layer and basically one data set without you having to do any sort of manipulation of multiple services and layers. So that's a very powerful feature. Right now you can only create a feature layer view on top of layers that you own. And then the other thing to watch out for is there's a setting in the portal that is called allow only standardized SQL queries. So this is on by default. Most don't really change this, but what it means is that we will enforce certain SQL in the filters that you can set for your feature layers. If you switch this off, you allow a much bigger set of SQL, and in some cases there are some things that you can do to get around the restrictions that the views actually impose. So it's a good idea to make sure that that's always true if you're going to use views. Now let's switch to authentication. For ArcGIS Online, there are 3 ways that users can authenticate. One is your standard username and password. We call this an ArcGIS Online account. Users can create these anytime. Usually you will invite your users to your organization, and then they'll just be able to sign up, create their username and password and security questions and all that as they're creating their account. You can also, as an organization, enable social identities or social accounts. You can have them log in using their Facebook or Google identity. That makes it much easier to log in quickly, and it works for some types of organizations and not for others. So it's a switch that is available to the organization. And then finally, there is enterprise accounts or enterprise logins. So if your organization has an Active Directory or an LDAP where you already manage your users, you're able to integrate that using something called SAML. So let me quickly talk about this, and then we'll actually see it in action. So with enterprise identities, we support something called SAML. SAML 2.0 is a spec, and that allows us, or allows the organization to basically set up a trust with their identity system, and when someone tries to log into ArcGIS Online, they get redirected to the identity system within your organization. They log in, and then there's an exchange of information to ArcGIS Online that tells us who logged in and that they came in, they typed in their credentials properly and they're validated and so on, and then we'll let them into ArcGIS Online, into the organization. So that's a very nice way for you to centralize your identity into one place instead of having another set of users on online. You can set it up so that your users automatically can log into the organization anytime without invitation, or you can set it up so that you have to invite them. A lot of times you buy a certain number of users on ArcGIS Online, so you might want to control how many users are allowed to log into your organization, depending on how big your identity provider space is. You can mix and match. You can have ArcGIS Online identities and enterprise identities, for instance. So you might have contractors using ArcGIS Online identities, whereas employees use enterprise identities. And new in December, we've added the ability to support enterprise groups in ArcGIS Online. So if you are managing groups, and you probably are if you have an IDP, you are managing groups in your identity provider, you can now link them up to groups on ArcGIS Online so that when a user logs in to ArcGIS Online, will see which groups they belong to and add them automatically to groups on ArcGIS Online, so that they can right away start seeing items and other things that you might want them to have access to. So let's switch over to Jeff here and for a demo on how that works.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm going to demonstrate configuring the enterprise logins in ArcGIS Online. What I've got right here is just a sample ArcGIS Online organization. I'm logged in as an administrator, and so I'm going to click on Organization, and under Edit Settings and Security, about halfway down or so is the option for enterprise logins. Now it's a two-step process. So the first step is setting your identity provider. And when you click Set Identity Provider, this is where you're telling ArcGIS Online how to access your enterprise login identity, or your IDP. And so you can give it whatever name you'd like. I'll call it Enterprise. As Andrea said, you've got the choice whether you want users to be added automatically or whether you want to specifically invite the users that can log in with this method. I'm going to select automatically, and of course you can also select from here the default license level and whatever role that they're assigned by default. In this case, the metadata is how we identify the enterprise identity provider, and you can either specify a URL, a file, or if you really feel up to it, you can manually input the parameters yourself. I've got a file in this case. So I will add that. Now I want to explore the advanced options here as well. You've got a couple of choices. Scroll down. You can encrypt. Now some identity providers that utilize SAML require encrypted assertions or signed requests. This is where you can enable or disable those. You can also enable whether when you log out of ArcGIS Online, that logout propagates to the identity provider. That's disabled by default. Now the last option here is one I'm going to enable. This is again what Andrea mentioned, new in December with the SAML-based group membership. And I'll give you an example of that. So now I click Set Identity Provider. And the next step, which I've already done in this case, is you click on the Get Service Provider. This gets you, it sends you a metadata.xml file. You need to you need to import this into your identity provider, whatever method is done for that. In some cases, it's a web interface. In others, you have to manually import the file. But that's telling your identity provider that, okay, hey, ArcGIS Online is going to authenticate with you. As I said, I've already done that. So let's save here. Now, before I log out, I mentioned I was going to demonstrate the enterprise groups. Let me go ahead and create a group right now. So I click on Create New Group and give it a name, Summary, Tag. Now, since we checked the option to allow for SAML enterprise groups, under who can join this group, we have a radio button here that says members of an enterprise group. If you select that, you need to specify the enterprise group name. Now, the syntax for the group name is dependent on the identity provider that you're using. In this case, I'm using ADFS, and I've configured ADFS to have the domain name / the group name in front of it. And so I need to type it in exactly as the identity provider sends the name, the group name. And again, it's dependent upon the identity provider that you use. So I click Create Group, and the group is created. Now, when I log out of here, and the sign-in page that I've got now shows I can either log in with an enterprise account or a built-in ArcGIS account. If I select enterprise, I'm redirected to my identity provider. In this case, this is the enterprise user I'm using. I click sign in. So I'm now signed in with my enterprise account, this AGS user 1. And since this user is a member of the enterprise group that I just created, if I click on groups, I'm automatically added into this role 1 group. That's what I just created. So that's the advantage of the enterprise groups, is you don't have to maintain membership. It's done automatically and refreshed automatically whenever an individual user logs in. Okay. 5.
Okay. Okay. So the next topic we're going to talk about a bit is how, this is more of a developer topic, how you integrate your application with our ArcGIS Online identities, basically. So there's something called OAuth 2, which is a standard to do with how web applications can integrate identity sort of on the web, which is called OAuth 2, and we support that. And so you, as an app provider and an app developer, can actually integrate your apps and be able to use ArcGIS Online identities and have people sign into it and then use their information in the application. So this is actually how it works for a web app. You go and actually register an application on ArcGIS Online in your organization. You get a client ID. You also set up some redirect URLs. And then in your application, you integrate our sign-in dialog, pass us the client ID. The user goes and signs in to that dialog. Basically, the username and password and all the credentials don't go to the application. They go directly to ArcGIS Online. And then once that login process is done, the sign-in redirects back to the application, validating that redirect URI is actually right for the application, and enforces it. And you get an authentication token. And then using that authentication token, you can work with the REST API on the user's behalf. And for instance, you could check out actually load up the web maps that they own or the data sets that they own and use them in, let's say, your JavaScript API app that you want to create for the user. There's a slightly more robust way of doing OAuth, which involves 2 steps. Now, the issue with that first one that I just talked about is that once that token expires, and it expires at some point, the user has to log in again. There's a second flow that is more used for native or desktop apps. You register the application, you integrate the sign-in dialog, and what you get back instead of an authentication token is a token that represents the user. It's called a refresh token. And using that token, you then get an authentication token. And that refresh token you keep safe in the application but you can then request an authentication token each time that it expires on behalf of the user and use the REST APIs. So that allows you to give them a sort of a longer lived session, the users, but it does require you to keep that refresh token sort of safe somewhere. And on web apps, it's getting better now, but on web applications, it's actually a little bit harder to keep those things safe. It used to be you had cookies, which weren't so safe for storage of important information. You have some local storage now, but as I said, this is more used for, say, native apps or desktop apps. A quick note about trust boundaries before we show you a demo on this topic. When we talk about, when a third-party application developer integrates their application with ArcGIS Online, this is sort of outside of the boundary of ArcGIS Online. For ArcGIS Online, when we talk about security and other things, we certify or audit certain components within ArcGIS Online itself. And then when users actually cross that boundary and log into something that's outside of that boundary, we, for instance, in this case, ask them to confirm that they are trusting the application that they are logging into. So there is an extra screen that happens when a user is trying to log into a third-party application. There are a few, we just introduced actually in, I believe it was December release, the concept of more trusted apps where we don't ask for that confirmation. There is something called an app launcher now in ArcGIS Online that the administrator can then configure apps that they want their organizational users to use and see, and it lives up on the toolbar. And those apps are trusted by the organization and therefore won't prompt users of that organization for confirmation. Also, if you are purchasing things off of the marketplace for ArcGIS Online, those things that you purchase are also automatically trusted. But as I said, other third-party applications give you an acceptance screen at this point. And then there's also our own Esri apps. There are things that live outside of ArcGIS Online, the boundary itself, like a GeoNet or our training site, etc. Those are not what we actually document in terms of security. They're not necessarily less secure or more secure, they're just differently managed. And so we have our admins, the admins of the org actually enable what's called Esri access for users that want to go outside this boundary to make sure that they are allowed to. Because for some organizations, it's important that they don't go outside of that boundary. Let me switch it back to Jeff.
I want to do a quick demo here of registering a web application. I've got a web application that I've downloaded and is currently running on this laptop right here. And it's configured, it's accessing a web map that exists in my ArcGIS Online organization, the sample one that I created. Right now, the app is not registered with it. So what happens when I open up the app, I get prompted to sign in. Now, if all your ArcGIS Online users are ArcGIS accounts, the built-in accounts, the ones that you manage in ArcGIS Online, this is great. You can just type in the username and you're good to go. But most of you, chances are, not using that. Most of you probably have the enterprise logins, the social logins, or either of those methods. And you don't want to see this window. You want to see your organization login window. And so that's why we need to register the application. So I'm going to cancel out of this and copy the URL of my application, log into Online as an administrator, and under Content, I'm going to add an item. And down here, I've got an application. I'll select that. And you've got some different choices here as to the type of application to add. In this case, this is a web mapping application, ready to use JavaScript. the URL, I'll put that in there along with the title and some tags. And I'll save this. Now this does not register the application. This just adds the item into the My Content page. But now, when you go to the item settings and scroll down to the bottom, there's an option for app registration. This is what we want. I click register, and the redirect URI is just the first part of the just the host name. I can take that out. And click add, and click register. And this generates an app ID for my application. And so I need to copy this app ID. And within my application, this is one a sample one that I downloaded a template. So if I go under the config folder here and in the default.js file, there's a spot to put in the OAuth app ID. So I'll paste it there. Save that. And now, when I refresh my application, instead of getting that sign-in window, I'll get this. Now, this is exactly what Andrea was talking about. This window right here is that initial confirmation that, okay, do you trust that you're about to sign in with ArcGIS Online to continue? I'm going to click OK. A pop-up will appear, and then this is where, this is the second one. I click Approve here. And I thought I had logged out. I was expecting to get the login window there. I did that too fast. Let me sign out here and do a refresh of this. Yeah, now it's cached. All right, anyway, but the point is, the point is what you get there is the login window. So you could log in with your social account or your enterprise account or whatever to access this. That's the advantage of registering the web application here. So I'm going to continue on this and talk about some of the other options under the My Organization edit settings window under security. We've seen a couple of them. This is where we went to enable the social logins, and the enterprise logins. But I want to just do a quick review of some of the other ones that are there. And at the top, when you go there, is the allow access through organization through HTTPS only. This is highly recommended if you can do this. Of course, it depends on the types of resources that the web apps are going to be accessing. If you know there's some resources out there that are available in HTTP only, then you'll have to uncheck this. But if you can enable HTTPS only, I'd highly recommend it for security's sake. Allow anonymous access. Again, like Andrea mentioned, if you want anonymous users to be able to access your content that you share with everyone, this is where you'd select that. Standardized queries. The disable user profile, that's this bottom one right here. You can't see my mouse, but the allow members to edit biographical information and who can see their profile. This falls in line with the EU GDPR. What is that? That's the General Data Protection Regulation, which is about to be, I believe that's implemented in May this year, and it's going to require companies in Europe to protect their personally identifiable information, or PII, in order for ArcGIS Online to be able to fall in line with that. You can allow members, or you can specify whether you want members to be able to edit their biographical or their personal information. And that's what that this bottom option is for, or this the middle option there. Now, under the sharing and searching, you've got the option to share whether or not you want users to be able to share content publicly, and whether they can search outside the organization, and also whether they can show whether you want social media links to appear for items. Going on down that same security settings, the social logins, like we've already discussed, that can be configured there. The allow portal access, This is an important one if you have a secured service in ArcGIS Online and you've got an external portal, a web application or web map or app in an external portal that will be accessing your secured service in online. And I'll do a quick demo of this where this comes into play. This slide right here basically kind of summarizes what I just said. It brings secure layers from ArcGIS Online into a central web mapping application. And this is beneficial if your external portal uses enterprise logins and your online uses enterprise logins, and you want users who access the web map on the portal to be able to log into online with their enterprise accounts. So let me do a quick demo of that. This is very similar to what I just showed you with registering the web application. So if I go here, and let's see, I want to go, I've got a portal right here. This is in the cloud. And I'm going to log in with my admin account here. And I've got a secured hosted feature service in my ArcGIS Online organization. So if I grab that URL right now, and I create a map and add the layer, it appears, and again, this did not do what I was expecting. Of course, in the demo, yeah. Let's log out of this. Let's log out of this. Let me just repeat this real quickly. And I go to map. No, that's the wrong one. That's why. There. Okay, so in this case, I get the window, the sign-in window here. Now, this is similar to what I demonstrated with registering the web application, where if you're using ArcGIS accounts, built-in accounts, you can sign in here, but if you're using enterprise accounts or social logins, for example, you can't sign in. And so if I go into my ArcGIS Online organization, log in here as an administrator, and under Edit Settings, Security, Allow Portal Access. Let me get... And I save this. Now when I go to my map, let me edit, and I'll create a new map here. And I add that same layer. I get the please sign in to continue, and this is the window, again, that should have appeared had I logged out before. I'm logged in as the current user on the other tab, so that's why it didn't show. But it does give you the option to sign in with your enterprise account at this stage. So, moving forward. Let's see. This. Okay. No. I apologize. There we go. Okay, now a couple of other options on the security tab there. The allow origins. This is useful for allowing third-party applications to make CORS requests to your ArcGIS Online items. Now bear in mind, this really only applies for post requests. So if you have an ArcGIS Online hosted feature layer where you're going to be allowing editing, or perhaps you've registered a GP service or something in online, the CORS requests are used by JavaScript applications when they're making post requests to your items on there. And so it comes into play for that. It's a method of securing the cross-domain access for JavaScript applications. Now, trusted servers is very similar to the CORS request, but it's in the opposite direction. So if you've got an ArcGIS Online web map and you're accessing a secured feature service, and it's secured with web tier authentication, then the trusted servers will come into play. And I'm going to demonstrate that shortly here. First, let me go for the CORS request. As I mentioned, it's when your web browser, your client app on your web browser is accessing a web application in ArcGIS, a third-party web application, and it needs to make a cross-domain or request to an item in your ArcGIS Online organization. As I mentioned before, it's primarily used when making cross-domain post requests. Now, for trusted servers, it's very similar, but you're accessing your web application in ArcGIS Online, and you need to access a secured feature service on ArcGIS server that's secured with web tier authentication. By default, this request, we don't send the credentials by default, and so for the trusted servers, you need to specify which servers you want to allow the credentials to be sent automatically to. So I've got a demo of that here. If I go to my ArcGIS Online org, and I've got a feature service on my, it's a feature service that's secured with web tier authentication. And so right now, when I add it, it adds, but I get this error that says, all right, it can't be accessed by ArcGIS.com. Well, clearly it's accessible because I can see the layer, but it recognizes that the CORS requests needed to make edits aren't supported, and so the editing option is unavailable here, or it's disabled. So if I go to my organization, edit settings, security, and trusted servers. Let me get, I just need the name of the server. I add the server here and save it. Now, when I go back to my map, it's still cached, but you'll notice it displays, and I now have the edit button here. And so what's going on behind the scenes is it recognizes that the CORS requests work, the credentials can be sent automatically. This only comes into play for services secured with web tier authentication, but it may or may not impact some of your web applications, but it's something to keep in the back of your head. So, all right, I'll pass it back on to you.
Okay, so a few other settings and information on security, and then we'll wrap it up. So as an administrator, as I mentioned before, the administrator has a lot of control over the organization. They can change all the settings of your portal. They can also administer a lot of things on the user, so just something to be aware of. Admins can manage and modify any items, groups, and profile of users. They can disable users, they can delete users, they can reset users' passwords, they can change their role, and they can also enable Esri access. So usually, if a user has trouble, for instance, logging in, they can go to their admins for the org to actually reset their password or help them log in. It's not something where they necessarily have to come to Esri support for any reason. Most larger customers have an enterprise IDP, and they use whatever way of authenticating into their enterprise identity system. But we also support multi-factor authentication on ArcGIS Online accounts. So if you want to enable that as an organization, you can. At that point, you then can use your smartphone basically with some changing numbers every 30 seconds, which you would have to provide in addition to your password when a user logs in. So we support Google Authenticator and Microsoft Authenticators, but it's actually a standard that's supported by other providers of apps for smartphones. The admin needs to enable it for their organization, and then the user needs to then set it up using their phone. What you do is you scan a QR code, and then that sets everything up on your phone to do that. We require 2 admins for that to work, 2 admins in the organization, so that because usually you set up multi-factor on your admin accounts because those are the privileged accounts. We don't want the admin to lose their smartphone and be completely locked out, so we actually require 2 admins for an organization to do this. We also do support password policies on ArcGIS Online accounts. The default password policy is 8 characters and 1 number currently. That might get stronger as as things change with just how complex passwords need to be or should be. You can actually, but as an organization, you can actually change this. You can make it stronger. You can choose the complexity of the password, the length of the password, and you can also set expirations. So if you are required as an enterprise to rotate your passwords every 90 days, you can do that. And also there's a history requirement that you can set up so users can't reuse the last X number of passwords when they change their password. And then finally, just in terms of an admin keeping track of usage and who's doing what, there's a status dashboard or page that you can go to, and you can see things like consumption and people that have public items and all the members in your organizations and all the groups and whether they're public or private and so on. So there's a section of the website where you can look at that to keep an eye on things. A few concluding slides on the infrastructure itself. So ArcGIS Online actually runs on cloud infrastructure. We use both Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services. These have various accreditations of various types like ISO 27001 and FedRAMP Moderate and SOC. So we run on top of those. And for ourselves, we've been working through various privacy compliance things, trustee privacy shields. Those are a little bit old and outdated. We are working on various statements for GDPR, which is the European Privacy Act, basically that's coming online in May. We've had, with the federal government here in the US, we've had a FISMA low authorization. We are working on a FedRAMP one, which is a slightly more modern set of controls for security. That we're actually in the midst of that. We're hoping to complete that in the next few months. And then in terms of just your security teams, and if they have questions about security for all our products, not just ArcGIS Online, there's a trust.arcgis.com site which you can go to and get information. For online, we have something called the Cloud Security Alliance questionnaire, where we answer some common questions that security teams will ask. So you can actually download this and give it to them. And then there's also some I think alias or feedback form where you can contact our security team if you have more questions. So we have 5 minutes left. We can take some questions real quick. Just fill out the survey. I know there's some instructions here on how to do it, but that basically concludes our presentation. So yeah, as I said, we have 5 minutes, so we can. Thank you. So let's.
Yeah, I want to be clear about what you're saying about enterprise login. So it's consuming some of your accounts in the cloud, and that's at least the back amount. Is that what I understood? You said
So
it's using your access.
Right. So if I understood correct, well, basically enterprise accounts. You log into your enterprise identity service, and then that automatically creates an account on ArcGIS Online.
Take that account apart or leave, or you may try to figure it out.
Oh, you mean when someone deletes the user from your enterprise system, does it delete it from online? Is that?
No, so I guess it just keeps taking out accounts. As you log into the enterprise account, you say it creates an account, and the account persists.
Yeah. So yeah, they, the user has to get through your enterprise identity system and then log into ArcGIS Online, but all their stuff persists, right, from login to login. An administrator of the organization would have to go and delete that information once.
Change passwords.
Yeah.
Again, sorry, it's the user updates the password on the enterprise platform. Set up the enterprise authentication to, I guess, update the password. Or is that password never stored on?
Right, so the question is, when you change the password on the enterprise system, do we have to update something on online? No, the answer is no. There's no passwords. There's no information about the user you have in the enterprise system other than their username on online and their email if you provide it. So, whatever they do on the enterprise system, change their password or whatever, we don't see any of that, and there's no linking that has to be done. Let's go on this side, I guess.
So I've got some government users that still like ArcGIS desktop. They don't want to go to Pro yet. It's like something they'd have to learn. We are starting to use SAML, but I'm finding that when they try and do things from desktop, for instance, even just geocoding, they're getting a pop-up to the that's asking them to log in with some credentials. It looks like ArcGIS Online, because we're already using enterprise accounts to log into ArcGIS Online. It's kind of confusing what they should be typing in there. Is desktop even supported with SAML or, okay.
Yeah, so the question is, well, you seem to have a problem on how desktop interacts with online and SAML.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I know, desktop, all it's doing is logging into ArcGIS Online with whatever the sign-in dialog that we expose, and so it should work fine with SAML. I don't know if you know of specific issues with that, or
I'm not aware of any issues. I mean, in my experience with it, with desktop should just show the login window, and you can select whether you want to choose your ArcGIS Online account or your enterprise account. But if you're seeing something else, we might need to take a closer look at that.
Yeah, because what's happening currently is they see just a button, login with your enterprise account. They press that. They don't have to enter any credentials. But if they're trying to do like geocoding, then suddenly they're being asked for what is your login history, what is your password, and it's like, what's that? Shouldn't it just be the enterprise account?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
there's a lot of questions there. I guess let's go back there.
Just a question around data sovereignty. So we have a number of clients who are not willing to put items into ArcGIS Online because they know that the hosting location is here in the United States. Is there any strategy to find
So the question is, yeah, in terms of data sovereignty and hosting data outside of the US, right now all ArcGIS Online data centers or the cloud that we use are in the US. We have been thinking about it, but no concrete plans to do anything outside of the US in terms of online. Right now, the solution is to basically run enterprise with the data out wherever it needs to be, and then integrate into ArcGIS Online that way. You know, I don't know, sometimes the requirement is just where the data sits at rest. Sometimes it's also where it flows, but if it's just sitting at rest in a particular country, then you can still integrate it with ArcGIS Online. So yeah, we've been thinking and discussing. It's quite a big, obviously, shift in terms of how we do things, and also our compliance with some of these federal U.S. entities. So yeah, we've been strategizing on that, but I can't say that there's anything. Let's go one more. Oh. So the question is, yeah, if you had two different ways that you want to access your feature layer, would you create two views, or would you do one of them with your original feature layer and then the other one with the view? I don't know if we have any recommendations around that. I would probably do two views personally, because it gives you sort of a common way of doing things, but
are there any permissions, like on the original feature service, that persist to a view when it's created?
Are there any settings on the feature layer, original feature layer, that go to the view? That I believe that the view inherits anything that the feature layer sets, but I'm actually not sure about that one. That one I need to look up. I mean, we can talk about it offline, or we can talk about it at our island today. So, I don't know if they're going to cut me off here because it's already past the time. So, I probably should shut it down, and then we can talk up here. Thank you.